Our debate topic will be on the issue of housing affordability and how the Australian government can provide for future population growth. I'd like to introduce Marcus Frizza, who is a well-renowned economist, Thomas Welch, the community representative from the city of Boroondara, Sandon James, a successful property developer, and myself, Joshua Ruzzier, a planning representative of Moreland City Council. Hello. My issue is with housing affordability and the constant extension of the urban boundary. I think every individual municipal city needs to look at its planning framework. Then they need to ask themselves the question, does the plan have a mechanism that creates affordable housing? In other words, there should be a target for affordability in our planning systems. Perhaps the government should look at creating another ministerial role solely committed to creating affordable housing. This group could work in conjunction with state planners and tackle these issues of high taxes and unsuitable planning regulations. By spreading out and opening up the urban fringe boundaries, we just create more social and environmental problems. Social problems arise by agglomerating low-income earning families into one area, and environmental problems such as long commutes in cars to work because there is no public infrastructure out there on the fringe. Planners govern what developers and architects do, so I think the problem needs to be solved at the top by our state and federal governments. Our government needs to work with, not against, our developers.
One of the major factors that limits the increase of supply of housing is due to the urban growth boundary. The urban growth boundary restricts development outside the metropolitan area. Affordable housing can be achieved quite easily towards the outskirts of the urban growth boundary. If the boundary was extended, it would encourage development and decrease housing price levels. However, the larger sprawl of individuals would create pressure on the infrastructure, putting greater pressure on the government budget for cuts in other sectors. The sprawl of individuals will also decrease human capital of individuals and not promote the growth of an economic city but creating smaller cities. Housing demand and housing supply are the two drivers that determine housing affordability. At the current rate of population growth, supply of housing is not able to keep up with demand, which will drive housing prices up. It is predicted that by 2026 there will be a supply crisis with a shortfall of 130,000 lots in the East Coast. Inland Australia is barren and only suitable for agricultural purposes. The coastal areas of Australia have to be developed in a productive manner. Government incentives and better government policy must be put in place to ensure a sustainable future where there is an equilibrium of supply and demand so that housing affordability is adequate. In order to create affordable housing without extending the urban growth boundary, there must be fiscal and monetary policies in place to promote the development of brownfield sites with our cities. The development of brownfield for residential purposes would result in some industries being forced to move out of the CBD and CBD fringe. Transport costs would increase and there would be a greater dependence on infrastructure. The resulting increase in housing affordability would cause price rise in the industrial sector, increasing price of goods and services, making the household still no better off. The 40% cuts in stamp duty of existing dwellings for first home buyers will increase the housing affordability for new owners, but this doesn't solve the undersupply issue. The recent changes to the first homegrown owners grant to $10,000 will, however, aid in the supply issue. This will promote the construction of new dwellings, bringing back the equilibrium of supply and demand. The increase in tax cuts and government incentives will negatively impact other sectors in the immediate future, resulting in no improvement in the standard of living. This housing stimulus is a long-term solution to aid the constructions of dwellings, such fiscal and monetary policies will reduce the likelihood of housing supply crisis in 2026.
There is no denying that the population of Victoria is growing. We know Melbourne is projected to reach a population of 5 million people by 2030. However, I don't believe that extending the urban boundary is the key to ensuring housing affordability for the future. Extending the boundary would increase commuting costs for residents going to and from work, as well as commuting for needs of services that limited surrounding infrastructure would lack. This is the consequential trade-off as a result for buying cheaper land and would ultimately decrease the quality of life. Furthermore, new expensive infrastructure would be needed to support these new metropolitan areas, costing taxpayers and council ratepayers more, leaving less money in everybody's pockets and an overall decrease in the quality of living. Communities living in green wedges like Mornington Peninsula or Yarra Valley, as well as regional towns near the extended urban boundary, would be threatened by urbanisation. This would compromise the quality of a semi-rural lifestyle. I believe that there is enough affordable supply of land for future populations within the current urban boundary. Due to a lack of affordability, many people can no longer hope to live in a suburban house surrounded by a garden. As a result, the way to achieve affordable housing within the current boundary is to redevelop existing land. Currently, many of the land uses of Melbourne are underused or are not used for their highest potential. If we could build higher density living through small modern apartment properties, which require less finance to run with lower rates, lower mortgage costs and less maintenance, we could achieve housing affordability for future populations within inner Melbourne. In addition, more intense development would need to be located along major public transport routes to provide both affordability housing on market-friendly development sites, as well as achieving a higher quality of life because of lower transport costs through closer proximity to work. It is also important for the quality of life that Better's social and public infrastructure is built like gyms, swimming pools, theatres, restaurants, parks and other interests to foster a better sense of community. If we look at global cities like New York, we can see how successful they have set up their city using high density living within large amounts and close proximity to public transport, not to mention all the public infrastructure. I feel, however, that the $10,000 government contribution and 40% cut on stamp duty as part of a first home buyers grant is not all that it appears. Many first home buyers see this as a real opportunity to buy affordable housing. But in reality, all this grant is doing is ensuring that the building industry and the developers continue to have new demand for their existing and future developments. Perhaps a more preferable solution would be for banks to offer longer term secure loans which would ease the monthly mortgage repayment burden.
When you're ready.
Affordable housing development is currently not feasible for developers within the urban boundary. Residential development is occurring within these areas. However, as a developer, it is simply not feasible to sell affordable housing within an adequate profit. Purchasing land in the CBD district does not allow developers to create housing which is affordable. Incentives are required and the urban fringe must be expanded. Increasing the urban fringe boundary will ultimately create a larger land supply, and thus developers will have increased opportunity to develop this affordable housing. The government needs to continue to persevere with the First Home Buyers Grant and the National Rental Affordability Scheme. Introduced in 2008, the NRAS scheme seeks to address the shortage of affordable rental housing by offering financial incentives to person or entities such as the business sector and community organisations to build and rent dwellings to low to moderate income households at a rate that is at least 20% below the market rent. The First Home Buyers Grant must be risen to enable first home buyers to purchase existing dwellings. In April this year, the government increased the grant from $7,000 to $10,000 with a 40% reduction in stamp duty. Government incentives need to continue to promote the First Home Buyers Grant and National Rental Affordability Scheme. Finally, planning restrictions on brownfield sites need to be altered to enable residential development. The proposal at Fisherman's Bend is an example of government policies and the interests of developers entwining. A proven example of this is the Docklands development. Ultimately, with the assistance from the Planning Department to alter existing restrictions on brownfield sites and government funding of the National Rental Affordability Scheme and First Home Buyers Grant, affordable housing within the urban boundary can be achieved.